The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, this is Katie Mercier from the Coalition for Juvenile Justice. Thank you so much for joining us for the Recruitment, Re-Engagement, and Re-Entry Incorporating Youth Voice into Juvenile Justice Reform webinar. We're going to start in a few minutes. I just wanted to let you all know that you will notice that all participants are muted right now. We'll have time for questions at the end of the presentation, but if you have them along the way, you can enter them into the chat box, and we'll be able to select and read them out loud at the end. Also at the end, if you want, you can click the little raise your hand feature, and then once I announce you, I'll be able to unmute you and you can ask your question. I strongly suggest that if you're on a cell phone that you use the questions feature as opposed to raising your hand, just to avoid any audio feedback. I am recording this webinar, and we will be sending out the recording and the accompanying resources within 24 hours. And with that, I turn it over to Alex Daraboli to introduce our speakers today.
Sure. So I'm just going to take a moment again to welcome everyone to the webinar. CJJ is really excited to have two great presenters to talk about this issue. This past August, CJJ hosted a youth summit that was really focused on preparing our young leaders to really be juvenile justice reform advocates. And so it's an issue that is really near and dear to our hearts, and we're excited to kind of talk about it some more today. So our first presenter is Starsha Ague, who is currently the Youth and Family Advocate Program Administrator at the Washington State Department of Social and Health Services. Starsha just started her new job this week, so prior to joining the Department of Social and Health Services, Starsha was an advisory consultant to the Division of Public Behavioral Health and Justice Policy at the University of Washington, where she was engaged in the selection process of mental health training materials for juvenile justice applications in connection with the MacArthur Foundation Models for Change program. Starsha is also was also appointed to the Washington State Partnership Council for Juvenile Justice by the governor, the Washington State SAG. And she is also the co-chair of the SAG's Youth Committee. Starsha obtained her bachelor's degree in criminal justice from Washington State University in 2010, and she was the 2009 recipient of Washington State's Spirit of Youth Award. Our second presenter is Deborah Robinson Baker, who's the director of the Raising Our Youth as Leaders project. The Royal project has gone on to become one of King County's leading models. Royal helps youth not only transition out of the criminal justice system, but this model helps youth actually discover their genius. In 2008, the Raising Our Youth as Leaders project was evaluated and given the Promising Program designation. Deborah has a master's degree in theology and nonprofit management education from Columbia University. So we're going to get started and jump right in.
Thanks so much, Alex, for the very kind introduction, and thanks to all of you guys. It looks like 102 people were able to join us today, so that's very exciting. So I'm going to give a little bit of background information about myself just quickly, if you could go to that first slide. I spent from the time I was 15 till I was 21 incarcerated for some mistakes that I made when I was a child. Rape, abuse, neglect, abandonment are all things that I'm still working on overcoming today. And because of my system experience, it gave me the drive and passion to come full circle to now be the Youth and Family Advocate Program Administrator. I think it speaks highly of our leadership, Assistant Secretary John Clayton, to create a position that clearly states that we value the input from youth and families, which is key to any system reform. If you could go to the next one, please. Maybe one more. So I'm a member of the Washington State Partnership Council on Juvenile Justice, which is commonly known as State Advisory Groups, or SAGs. Our Partnership Council has done a good job at including youth voice. Our current committee is made up of youth who are incarcerated. People often talk about one of the hardest things about state advisory groups is sustaining and recruiting youth. And we have a captive audience since our youth are incarcerated, and we're working closely with them, and so that allows us to stay grounded in the work that we're doing and help us to have better outcomes for our children who are system involved. Next. Let's see here. Let's see. So our youth committee, it's really exciting to have our youth who are incarcerated actually be part of our youth committee. When I was at the conference, the Youth Empowerment Conference that Alex was talking about earlier, I know that some of the states were struggling with even having a youth who was on probation be on the council, and so I feel like our state is kind of ahead of the game in allowing youth to be a part of the committee. Next, please. So the focus of the Washington State Partnership Council on Juvenile Justice is to fulfill these OJJDP requirements, the deinstitutionalization of status offenders, sight and sound separation, disproportionate minority contact, and include youth to be a part of the council. As a result of having the youth committee, we realized that these were only like 20 youth of about 800 who are locked up, and we wanted to be able to get kind of a more broader, get more input from the youth, and so we created, they're sort of like student governments at each facility, and we call those United Youth Councils. And another really exciting thing is that we're going to allow 4 of our youth who are incarcerated to apply to be a part of the actual Partnership Council, which is a gubernatorial position, a gubernatorial appointment. And then the governor will pick 2 of them out of the 4 to participate. Next. I love this. Is one of my favorite parts, is to share pictures of the kids and the work that we've done so far. So incorporating youth voice throughout the juvenile justice system in our state, taking this path requires a change in the mindset about juvenile justice system involved youth. It's essential that we change our thinking from regarding our youth as victims and villain offenders who need to be fixed or punished to the mindset that sees our youth as young people who have made mistakes but are capable of change and growth, and who have value and resources to share to become effective agents in enterprise and larger system reform. Next. So what is Youth Voice? Youth Voice is a statewide movement to promote young people's perspectives and engagement in addressing system reform. Training youth in community organizing and advocacy is particularly helpful for justice-involved youth whose social and political status is marginalized and who are often most isolated and disenfranchised. And you can see that the United Youth Council is made up of 3 to 5 youth from each of these 3 facilities. And as they transition into the group home and re-enter back into the community, then we expand our Youth Voice program to that group home. And that youth is then the Youth Voice representative for that facility and helps create a United Youth Council there. Next. So why is engaging youth in juvenile justice reform important? Well, if you ask me, I don't think that we can really do it without them. And it holds the system accountable. And oftentimes a lot of people don't like to talk about it, but juvenile justice is very politically driven in a lot of ways. And so what I like to come back to is the most important thing. This bottom is a quote from one of our youth who is just about to be released and has been participating for about a year now. And they said, youth voice means a lot to me. It means that I can tell my side of the story and then I can stand up. Let's see if I can move this. I can't. Oh, sorry. Well, you guys can read it. Being a part of the Youth Voice gives me hope for a better future, not only for myself, but for future generations. I know that I don't have to just sit down and wait for change to happen. I can speak up and I can contribute. And when this young lady first came to Youth Voice, she was really shy. She barely wanted to introduce herself, and now she's probably one of the best leaders that we have, starting community college as soon as she gets out. She's in a group home and doing very, very well. Next. So what are the benefits for these youth? I think that it does an incredible amount of things. It increases confidence, it helps them to build relationships that they wouldn't usually have. It empowers them. It helps break the stereotypes. A lot of people don't realize, a lot of people think that our kids are like these bad felons or these bad seeds and there's no hope for them. But really when people get to know them and they get out and speak on these panels, it gives them an opportunity to see that they're just like every other youth. They just had kind of a rough start at life. And we use, you can see from this link right here, the Teach with TVW. We educate the broader community about juvenile justice system involved youth. And we use Teach with TVW modules, which TVW is like our local C-SPAN, and they're video-based lessons that are designed to teach key aspects of Washington civics and in government. It also is created in collaboration with Washington civics teachers. Each module includes a short explainer video, discussion questions, and standards. And what's really great about this is that usually youth who come into the system are behind in school. When I was 15, I had a 3rd grade and 5th grade reading level, and I had to do a lot of playing catch-up. And so civics wasn't something that I had known even at 15, so giving the youth the opportunity to participate in legislation and policy is very, very exciting. Next. So what are the challenges? We don't want to prepare our youth for their stay while they're locked up. Rather, we would like to give them the tools which can prepare them to enter back into the community. It's essential that we change our thinking regarding our youth as victims and villains who need to be fixed or punished to a mindset that sees our youth who have made mistakes and capable. Some of these challenges is selecting the youth, scheduling restrictions, because our youth are locked up. We still have to make sure that they go to school and that we prepare them as much as we can, giving them employment opportunities and long-term engagement and participation. Next. Let's see here. So steps to engaging youth. It creates opportunities to be heard. We have youth panels, the youth review policy. I told you about the civic engagement in part. To include youth in important discussions and incorporate their feedback. And I always think it's really important to go back and to show them how you use the feedback that they had that they gave, so that it helps them to feel validated. To compensate the youth for being at the table, since usually everyone else is getting paid to be there, and provide meaningful incentives for the youth. Next. So I told you guys that the Washington State Partnership Council on Juvenile Justice has a youth committee, and what our youth committee decided to do was create our own logo with the youth who had been incarcerated before. He's now in graphic design and volunteers for us part-time. And we wanted to have a little bit of everything in here. So we have the Tacoma Dome, the Space Needle, the Capitol, the Eagle, And this is kind of a summary of our 2013 action plan and dissemination materials. We created a welcome packet for every youth who comes into the system to get. Has how to do a resume, a cover letter, what's a budget, what's DMC, and quotes from previous youth who have been part of Youth Voice about why it's important to them and what does it mean. Next one. These are the applications at each of our 3 facilities that the youth apply for. This is the cover page that you guys can see, and then the second one in the left-hand corner is the actual application that they fill out, asking them why do they want to be a part of it. We tried to kind of make it look like a resume with similar questions so that they could get a little bit of practice in. And the youth, the applications are reviewed by the youth, but because the kids are locked up, there's a staff who oversees it, but the kids have the final say as who gets to be a part of it or not. Next one, please. These are probably what I'm very, very, very proud of the youth for. They're products that we have helped push for different reform issues in our state. One is DMC, disproportionate minority contact. This one is draft, but this young man is just totally talented, and we really wanted to create something. It's the first DMC infographic in Washington State ever. Also, our state was out of compliance with the PREA standards, and so we wanted to be a part of helping our state get back in compliance. And so this is a comic. It's a draft version, but every youth will be getting who comes into the facility so that they know the different options, and it's you know, fun and interactive. And the third one is it's the juvenile records infograph. Washington State is founded upon the core principle of rehabilitation. Society benefits when rehabilitated youth reintegrate into society and become law-abiding members of their communities. A major barrier to reintegration is the widespread dissemination and easy-to-access public juvenile records. Having public juvenile records can prevent youth from obtaining education, employment, and housing. And this was one of the issues that our youth decided legislatively they wanted to work on. And at the bottom of the infograph, you can see a change.org petition. We're 2 signatures away from getting 500. Last year, the bill passed the House 97-0 unanimously, which really doesn't happen. And so we're hoping that this is really going to be the year that it happens, but there's absolutely no way that we could have made it this far without the kids stepping up and hearing what they have to say, or even bringing up the fact that it is an issue. The next one. And we know that our current policies have discriminatory impact on minority youth too. This is, so that you said the petition is not enough, Sarsha. We have to figure out how we can reach as many people as possible and educate people, teachers and community members, different organizations about why juvenile records and how they're affecting us. And so we worked with Fab 5, which is an organization that does art and dance as a way to engage youth, and the Washington State Partnership Council to create an educational video. And here's the links. There's a 5-minute preview. We have up to 1,000 views so far. And what it is it's a judge, a probation officer, a police officer, talking about their perspective as to why we really need to give kids a second chance. And then the second thing, let's see here. Oh, and it's interweaved in between the youth stories, and so it makes it really powerful. And the youth autobiographies, every youth who comes into Youth Voice, we encourage them to write their story down. We don't have the funding yet, but we're hoping to find someone who would like to help us to publish these kids' stories. And so we call it turning the page. And the experiences and mistakes are only chapters. Chapters don't determine how the story ends, and they created that saying. And these are pictures of them presenting. And so I'm going to turn it over to Deborah now.
Thank you, Starsha. Thank you, everyone, for being in the call this afternoon. Again, my name is Deborah Robinson Baker. I'm the director for the Raising Our Youth as Leaders model. Just a little bit more information about me that's not here. I was actually born with cerebral palsy and endured a lot of childhood trauma, and part of what saved my life, and a big part of it, was the fact that I entered the door of a public defense agency when I graduated high school at 18 and stayed, and I didn't look back. Public defense helped to save my life, and so those of us who are in the field of criminal law or other aspects you never know the impact that you're having on people as they're coming into your office. Well, you can read my bio there. Next slide, please. The vision of Royal is that Royal is an industry leader in creating world-class programs that help young people discover their genius. Our theory of change is that we teach young people how to think, not what to think. And an example of that is, as adults, we're constantly telling our kids what they need to do. Well, you know, when we connect you to this resource, what we want you to do is A, B, C, and Z, or let me go do it for you. We don't do that. We actually teach them how to think for themselves. Another part of our theory of change is that thoughts actually create our world. So what are you thinking? How are you thinking that is helping you to move forward? A lot of youth like to say, well, I don't know, or I wasn't thinking at all, and we really delve into that and show them the reality of that. Royal is an evaluated model and a promising practice model that holds an 87.8% success rate at transitioning youth out of the criminal justice system. We were at a 75% success rate consistent over 13 years. We went up to 87.8% in 2011. And so since that time, that's where we've been. We confront the issue of mass incarceration. One way we do that is, in our model, we help young people take a look at their involvement in creating systems. We're all systems advocates, we're all advocates around changing the system, and we're all agents of change. And as adults, we're doing it from one end. But in Royal, what we do is we have a series of modules that help youth understand how their behavior, how their thoughts are helping to create and keep systems and the current criminal justice structure in place. The youth love it. These young people, our future leaders, accomplish their personal, professional, and educational goals toward success and self-sufficiency. Next slide, please. We do that by our project components include life coaching / mentorship. Royal certifies its life coaches within our model. We are the first program in the country that developed life coaching specifically for kids in the true discipline of life coaching. So we don't have people who tell kids what to do, or who are sports coaches and come in and we call that coaching. No, no, no. It has a whole discipline around it, and we've developed it and modified it specifically for kids. It was tested in our promising program evaluation and was found to be successful. We utilize case strategizing, which is an improvement on case management. We teach our youth that in order to be successful, there has to be a plan, and so we talk with them in the concept of plans and strategies. The Young Gent Society is one of our boys groups initiatives, and the interesting thing is, one of the interesting elements to it is that our boys learn life skills development, what it means to be a man. They have all these dialogues and conversations, and then at the end of it, they get a suit from K&G. And Royal in the evaluation was cited to work with some of the highest risk kids within the Washington State area. We were evaluated against about 7 other programs. We started out with 19. 7 of us made it, and Royal topped all 7 in several different areas, including working with the highest risk kids. And so, if you can imagine boys who have never gone shopping for themselves in a formal way, having this wonderful experience of getting a suit and having it tailored to them, enough said. you just have to experience it. And then our girls model, Jewels and Gems, it's a girls group that teaches character development and some other things based on Jewels, Gems. And then our Unchained Genius Youth Leadership Academy. It is a component that was developed out of from the element of youth voice, and I'll explain a little bit later. And then we have a model called Life is Your Business. It was originally called Mind Your Business. We now call it Life is Your Business, and we teach our youth about managing and embracing their life through the concept of business language. Next slide, please. My presentation today is going to focus, because Starsha did such a great job at really talking about some of the work that's going on in Washington State, particularly the Youth Council. I'm going to focus on some more of the technical pieces to give you some tips and tools and ideas about working with youth voice, so less about our model per se and more on the technical pieces. In Royal, the definition, we describe the definition of youth voice here. Youth voice speaks to the involvement, ideas, thinking, and opinions of youth. We title youth involvement as service learning. Service learning is allowing youth to be stakeholders and contributors in various aspects of the juvenile justice or social justice work. It is incorporating the input of youth in the decision-making points of the organization's initiatives, programs, conversations, and planning. Next slide, please. Some other examples. Starsha gave some really great examples of where to incorporate and how to incorporate youth voice, but here are some other areas that maybe you've thought about or maybe you haven't thought about. Board membership, program design and implementation. I love that piece. Agency artwork. Starsha talked about having youth design logos. When Royal first started, we actually got permission from one of our youth. He wanted his part of his face to be part of the logo, and so we had an artist come in and we drew a before and after picture of him as to what he looked like, what he may have looked like, and the weights he had in his face before Royal, and then what he looked like afterwards. And we still have that logo today. We've gone on, but we've kept that as artwork, and it's a beautiful piece. Performance feedback, and what I mean by that is we have a screening process, for instance, and the youth are allowed to actually rate the screening process. So, and there's all kinds of benefits to that. Number one, it helps the youth to feel empowered and to feel like they are that this is their program, but also it allows us to know very early on how we're doing. A lot of times we ask the questions and we get feedback at the end. We ask from beginning all the way to the end. Webinars, PowerPoint presentations. There's a couple of slides at the end of this presentation where our youth were asked to create a PowerPoint slide and talk about some of their concerns around racism and public education. That's a great way to incorporate youth voice. They designed the PowerPoint themselves. Working with other youth as trainers, that's key. They love to train. Youth love to be in front. Most youth love to be in front of people, and they like to train. Well, I'll say a lot of youth. Let me put it that way. Youth as funders, fundraisers, et cetera, et cetera. You see that piece there. A big piece that I really want to talk about is, as adults in this work, I recommend that all of us in this work, working with youth, incorporate youth as mentors for us. So I have two youth that are my mentors. They are not in Royal. They are outside of Royal, and they help me stay grounded in my perception, in my perspective, in my ideas and thoughts about what's going on in today's society. They actually act as the experts. They are positioned that way. I position myself to listen to them. I ask them questions. They love it. I recommend that everyone has one, finds a young person that agrees to be their mentor. I recommend the age recommendation is from 15 to 17 years old, because by 15 they've lived enough and they have enough language to actually help you. 18, they're starting to think about what it means to be an adult, and so they're kind of moving on. Meet them over lunch, tea, or have conversations with them. Allow them to give input that will inform your work. They're interesting, and youth are interesting in that they're resilient. They're not weighted down with the concerns and responsibilities always of being an adult. With that, then they're more in touch with their creative instincts and their pure insights. The adults, as adults, we can gain and learn from their creativity and their insightfulness. There's another component that I didn't talk about in Royal called design engineering that is unique to Royal, and it's a person or persons within the model that actually works on program design and the creativity pieces of it, and so we incorporate our youth voice in that work. Next slide, please. To continue on it while they're switching slides, other benefits to having youth as mentors. The benefit for the youth is that they're seen, they feel like they're able to assist. They're seen as a problem solver, contributor, or coach. They love it most times. The youth will see, they're able to see in a tangible way the power of their voice and their creativity when we ask them to mentor us. This is a piece that I am kind of passionate about. It came to me at the time of the housing boom, and I found myself in front of a television, and there was a man from California who had a mic in his face, and he was talking about, it was in the hills of California, and it was kind of an affluent neighborhood, and there were all these older model homes that were built, I think, in the 30s and the 40s, and there was space in between the homes, so there was unused land, and developers went in, saw an opportunity, and built new houses on the land. I never will forget it. This man was sitting with a microphone in his face, and he was almost in tears as he stood next to a sinkhole. And the sinkhole came about because there wasn't enough analysis. There was not, I don't know what happened to the environmental analysis, and that was his thought. He said, I don't know when they did an environmental analysis, if they did one, what they came up with, but now we have sinkholes coming up in our neighborhoods. We're not sure if we're going to be able to maintain our homes. These homes have a lot of values. Movie stars had lived there previously. We now have them. We don't know what we're going to do. And so it caused me, I don't know, I just had this moment where it caused me to think about social service development and the importance of doing an impact analysis. Just because we have a great idea or a good idea, is it good for the time? Is it appropriate for the time? What's the impact of it? So when we're deciding to incorporate youth voice, my suggestion is provide or go through an impact analysis. Is this a good idea for us? Next slide, please. And if so, why? What's the impact? How will it affect or impact the community? How will it affect or impact the youth? We'll talk a little bit about that in a second, a little bit more. Here's some tips for organizational readiness. It's recommended that the organizational programs have at least 3 years experience in working with youth. I would think it would be really complicated to have a new youth program and then try to build a component that's incorporating youth voice at the same time. That's a lot of work. Incorporating youth voice into models like ours, it is a separate component in and of itself, and it takes a lot of, it takes work to get it there. It's recommended, again, that the organization or program have an established mission or vision. The organization or program should have capacity for training, mentoring, and supporting the young person. Next slide, please. How do we honor youth voice within the work? Here are some tips and tools on that. Have clear and appropriate reasons for incorporating youth. Have incorporated into strategic plans, then we know we've done the impact analysis to a point, right? Incorporated, or when thinking about it, make sure that, I'm sorry, hold on one second because I have two thoughts that are running into each other. I'll leave it. So just make sure that you do the impact analysis and have the strategic planning, have the planning around it, so that way you are clear that the reasons are appropriate. Let's not just, and I don't believe I've seen a lot of organizations in the community do this, just grab up young people to try to forward our mission and our vision, to have them speak on it. There needs to be careful thought and planning behind it. Provide training and mentorship for the young person. That is so key. We oftentimes think that we're trying to forward the missions of our organizations and programs, and then we have these stars as kids, and I've seen situations where they've just asked kids, or programs have just asked kids to get up and speak. The kids didn't do so well, and then when we've had conversations to kind of figure out what happened, we were told that the young person didn't receive really any training. They were just kind of told what to do, so be careful about that. Always provide compensation, incentives, or a list of takeaways. Be clear on talent and limitations of the young person. Keep in mind they are young people. Their brains are still developing, and it is appropriate and it is a must to set limitations when working with these young people. When I speak on limitations, I'm speaking in terms of limiting the amount of work or the amount of, let me say it this way, when they're doing speaking engagements. When you're incorporating them into the organizational type work, the creative design pieces, the boards, all of that, those are can be more group activities, and so the energy around groupthink is very different than when we have youth as speakers. Okay, so when you have youth as speakers, you want to make sure that you're kind of limiting or setting some boundaries around that. In Royal, we allow each youth to have 3 speaking engagements a year, typically no more than that. I have seen situations, and we've been called to step in to help kind of mediate, if you will, situations where youth were asked to do almost 10 engagements in a year, and it burnt youth out. We have seen youth in hospitals. I kid you not. We have seen youth have breakdowns. We have had youth in other programs reoffend, and actually we had one youth in Royal reoffend because when we got him, when we came in contact with him, a lot of people in the community used this one youth to do all of their speaking engagements. And so by the time we got to him, he was burnt out, and his ego was so in there. That's how he found some of his identification there, and there was no mentorship. And so by the time we got him, he was so far along, we couldn't pull him out of it. So be careful. Again, be aware of your boundaries when working with youth over 18. Research says that youth between 19, or not youth, young people, not even young people, young adults, thank you, between 19 and the 30s, one of the key focuses for them is relationships. They're trying to figure out how to be in relationships, either professionally or romantically, or even within their family structure. They're improving those relationships. And so it's very easy for a youth to misunderstand, a young adult, if the boundaries are not clear, it can be easy for them to confuse it sometimes. So you want to be careful about that. And I bring it up because we've been called in situations where young adults, they were like 18, 19, in their 20s, have been asked to speak, have been asked to participate, have been asked to support organizations, and boundaries have been crossed, breakdowns happened. We were called to go in and really do some spiritual work, if you will, and emotional work to help restore folks. So be aware, just be aware. Celebrate the accomplishments or even the mistakes, right, especially of youth speakers. celebrate their accomplishments and the mistakes, because they want to do such a good job, especially if it's their first time, that if they make a mistake and they haven't done it before, they will focus on the mistake. So they really need the mentoring. They really need the debriefing. They'll smile and grin and tell you everything is okay until you debrief them. And so get into the debriefing with them and help them to put everything in a healthy perspective that will preserve their self-esteem, that will preserve their ego, that will preserve who they are as young people. It's a must. Next slide, please. Other tips: maintain a clear accountability system. Again, make it meaningful opportunities. Keep all of it's important that we keep all of our agreements and commitments as adults. Don't overcommit yourself or the young person. Be honest if things have to change. Youth understand it. Just be honest about it. This is boundaries again, have clear start dates and clear end dates. This helps keep the youth and the program healthy. Don't be careful about inviting youth involvement and then dominating the process or ignoring the input. When we have youth forum and youth think tanks here and youth in our design engineering department, when we invite creative collaboration, we actually allow the youth to drive the process and we just facilitate and moderate. Okay. Next slide. And here's a sample of the youth voice. So we'll let you take a look at that slide, those slides in your own time, having us say, letting us help you out of this mess. And that concludes my presentation.
Okay, thank you so much to our presenters. If you guys have questions, you can send them in through the questions box, or you can press raise your hand, and I can unmute you. I'll just give everyone a few minutes to type things up. Okay, I have my first question. With the statistics telling us so many of juvenile, quote, offenders having mental and behavioral health challenges, do you think a group such as this would be beneficial in informing system of care work or mental and behavioral health reform?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sure. With the statistics telling us so many of juvenile offenders having mental and behavioral health challenges, do you think a group such as this would be beneficial in informing system of care work or mental and behavioral health reform? I think that question might have been for Starsha. It came in really early on. So.
I would think that that would be a question for Starsha.
Okay, I figured it would be both of us. Roy would be a great project for any of the youth in our state, I think. But the answer is absolutely yes. Youth voice. I think with the statistics that we know, 50% of our population having been in the child welfare system or been touched with the child welfare system before. I think the answer is yeah. I'm not sure. I wish I could see the questions on here. Let's see.
Well, so I can ask that person who asked that question, if you have any kind of follow-up or anything like that, you can just type it into the box. I have the next question is, what is your opinion on the age of consent, and what are the barriers to engaging youth prior to a crisis?
I guess my question, I don't know when they're talking about age of consent, are they talking about within youth voice work or, so in Royal, we actually incorporate youth voice at the age of about 15. And sometimes even at 13, like we have a phenomenal young man who's 13 years old and in Royal, and I believe that he hasn't been tested yet, but I would think his intelligence scores are going to be pretty high when he is tested. And so he's participating in our Youth Voice work. For Royal, we have youth, previous youth that were in the program who are now in their 30s, and a couple of them have been a part of creating case law. That's one of our other successes, and a young lady we're going to be speaking in Washington D.C. Starsha and I at a Models for Change at the Models for Change conference, and our former client is going to be presenting with me. She's 30. She's like 29, 30, and working for the Baltimore Orioles. I think there's a part 2 to that question, and I missed it. But age of consent, you know, I think you have to. For me, it's assessing the youth in your program. I typically don't go under age. Typically, for me, I don't go under age 15, and I make exceptions for the bright 13 and 14-year-olds, if that makes sense.
The second part of that question was, what are the barriers to engaging youth prior to a crisis?
Prior to a crisis in their lives, or prior to a crisis, okay, in terms of letting them participate in Youth Voice, I would say barriers could include, of course, engagement. And I think tips and tools for engaging youth is letting them know. For us, we let them know about the current structure. We decide what areas where we want youth voice, where we think the program and the model needs youth voice, and we've created various aspects where youth voice is needed. And then we actually show them what we're doing, and they participate. Now, one of the things I will say is creativity. Youth are attracted to creativity, and our model is phenomenally creative. We've had some phenomenal people work in our model over the years, and so they love it. So creativity is a key piece, and if you don't have enough creativity, then one way to engage them is say, we need some more creativity, or what do you think is missing? And the minute we ask the youth what their thoughts are, they engage.
Great. The next question is, how do you deal with the ego issue for young leaders?
Boy, that's a great question. In Royal, again, it's setting the boundaries. So for number one, it's letting them know, number one, having about, like I said, up to three engagements in the year. We don't go any further than that. Another way to address it is we don't single out any one young person. We divide the opportunities up. And so in a smaller program, if you're like 3 people strong and you're just getting your model up off the ground and you have a young person that you think is really great, then it's the young person and the executive director and staff, and it's talking a lot about how we're, using the word fortunate, and so using words of humility, but really evening out the opportunities, so that you don't create these pseudo megastars in their heads. And that's what happened to this other young man that I told you about. He was a pseudo megastar because all the legislators, city government, people had observed him. He had spoken at some graduation, and they just glommed onto him. And so he had become a megastar in his own head. And so everybody asked him. No, they didn't go after other kids. They didn't look for other youth. He was it. So if you, like I said, make sure that the opportunities are even, and have accountability in place so that occurs. So you're not just working one youth all the time. Then it gives them and build them in and bring them into the aspect of and the concept of sharing.
Great. The next question is for Sarsha. How is your state advisory group able to get buy-in from the powers that be, including incarcerated youth in the group, and how were some of the challenges you mentioned, especially selection, transportation, and scheduling, dealt with?
So the first part of that question, how do we get buy-in? Actually, that's a great question because there wasn't buy-in at first. We had probably done about 3 or 4 youth panels about the school-to-prison pipeline, about disproportionate minority contact, and about youth engagement to about probably like between 50 and 100 people in the audience that varied from judges and prosecutors, court folks, and probation officers. And slowly but surely the word started getting around, and people really wanted to have the youth come and talk at their schools and testify in front of the legislature and do all these different things. Like Deborah was saying, everyone wanted to go to them to come and do presentations. And so we sort of use that as a stepping stone to get buy-in from people. So when I was invited to be a keynote speaker, I'd say, okay, great, I'll be a keynote speaker if I can bring my youth panel. And then when people really listen to what they have to say, there's just absolutely no way you could hear them and without your heart just melting and wanting to do something and wanting to put policies and things in place so that youth can have a voice and family can have a voice at the table. And then the second part was how, can you remind me, Katie?
Sure. Let me just, sorry, going back, scrolling. How were some of the challenges you mentioned, especially selection, transportation, and scheduling, dealt with?
Funding always helps, to be honest. When you can bring grants and scholarships and that kind of stuff to the table, it always makes it easier and people more willing to get kids where they need to go. I would say I would have to just really give Mr. Clayton, Assistant Secretary, really the credit. His leadership, he said, we are going to have youth voice. We're going to bring them to the table. We know it's going to be a huge culture change. It's not going to happen overnight. We've been doing this for about 2 years now, or a little over a year, and I think we're finally getting to the point where we are seeing the culture change, kind of the fruit of the advocacy. So hopefully that answered the question.
And I just would like to comment on the first part. It is a challenge sometimes to, the transportation issues can be a challenge. But I think, like Starsha said, funders are key. Let me add this little piece, and that is, when your program is asked to present for other events, so our youth voice started very naturally. The Washington State Supreme Court justices wanted to be educated on the juvenile justice system, and they wanted youth voice and youth perspective. And so in that, they wanted us to come. And so I started asking for stipends and for the support. It's so very, very, very key. That is another thing that can lend to burnout. If we constantly have youth, if youth are constantly asked to speak and there's no compensation, there's no restoration, no give back. When we go to the grocery store, we're going for groceries, and in exchange we give our funds for that. And it's the same for youth. They need to be poured back into. And so now when we do events, I make sure that there's a youth stipend or some sort of creative incentive so that we're pouring back into them as they are telling their powerful stories. And sometimes their stories are very emotionally charged and all of that. So that is a great way to help with the transportation, help with engagement. Don't be afraid to ask people. You'll be surprised what folks can do, even if it's $75, $100 for a stipend, $50, $25. You'll be surprised.
Okay, we've got about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to try and get as many questions as possible. The next one is, how involved are youth parents in the program?
In Royal or Youth Voice, or both?
We can do both. Let me do Royal. In Royal, when our model was created so that we didn't need parental consent to work with juvenile justice youth. And the reason being is because most of our youth were involved in criminal law, and sometimes the parents were either victims or the perpetrators. And we had situations where the youth were found. We had to go get youth in the community behind the trash can dumpsters in the middle of the night because they were being violated by their parents. We even had a youth that was being shot at by his dad. Okay, so in that, we then incorporated the parent involvement kind of at the end of the process as far as telling the story. The parents can always testify to the change that they've seen in the youth. And then we will incorporate parent voice perhaps in the board, on advisory councils, in terms of program feedback. How are we doing as a program? What would you like to see us doing more of? Blah, blah, blah. Just from an outsider's perspective. Where appropriate, that's how we incorporate parental support and input.
And in regards to Youth Voice for JRA, I would say that we have really focused on the youth and are now expanding to parents and families as a result of the youth saying, hey, we want to include them more, we'd like to hear what they have to say, and we're working on lots of different things in terms of reentry. I don't have a whole list in front of me, but I'm thinking there's going to be like a community newsletter that goes out about what JRA is doing with the kids, different activities at different facilities, a newsletter, and a community brochure, so that when youth come into the facilities, the youth helped create it, and the staff and the youth will have something to send to the parents to get them involved. And so we're excited to see with this new position it just created this week. So we're excited to see kind of how to get more families involved and have a couple of focus groups already set up for the beginning of December.
If I could add one more thing, two thoughts. One is the other piece about Royal is when you're trying to decide whether or not you should add youth voice as a component, think about the natural connections. Is it a natural next step? So one of the things I didn't mention is that as a natural next step, because a lot of the parents, when we were evaluated and so forth, the parents participated in our promising program evaluation as well. The parents have said, I need a life coach, or I need case strategizing, or I need, and so I know that in about 24 months, we're going to be really taking a look at that. And the reason I pushed it out that far is because we're doing some work and creating a strategic plan about replicating the model into South Africa. In that, however, look and see if it's a natural next step. That's how we even got involved in Youth Voice. People were asking, can we hear from some of your young people? We've seen the work. Can we hear from them? I didn't even want to add another component to us. I really didn't. And so, but we did it, and as a result of that, that's how the Youth Leadership Academy, the Unchained Genius Leadership Academy, came about. And so now we're working with Antioch University here in Seattle to deepen the model. And there's some really great things that are going to come of that. But look for the natural connections. Look for the natural next steps.
Great. I think we have time for just one more question. Do you work cooperatively with a local probation department in your community?
I do all the time, every day, all day long. In Royal, we do. It is a part of our work. When we first, so let me say this. Tips and tools for engaging probation and allowing them to connect with the work is number one, if you have kids that are involved in your program that have probation officers, show up. Show up. Show up in the young person's life, show up in court. Call the probation officer and be an interested party. We've had probation officers on our advisory board. All of our kids, we provide support for kids, predominantly youth of color, ages 13 to 18, and then we provide technical assistance to 18 to 25. They come back sometimes and want to know how to buy a house, et cetera, et cetera. So we provide some of that support. In that, we work with probation officers basically for the last 20 plus years is what we've done. Probation officers want to know that your program is valid, that you're viable, that they can trust you to do the work. And then we've had probation officers lend their voice to the youth voice component. I have 2 probation officers, more than that, but 2 specifically, who we've captured them saying when they started working with this young person, I didn't even know what we were going to do with them, but because of the changes that Royal has, because of Royal, the youth has made so many changes. And then the youth have gone on to stay connected to their probation officers, some of them, and probation has become just a viable support and also part of the voice. We've incorporated them as part of the voice of the program by putting them on boards, by allowing them to share their perspective on the youth before, the youth today, why we need programs. Yes, we work with probation.
Starsha, I just wanted to give you a chance to answer probably and maybe talk about how your SAG works with probation.
We have detention managers and core administrators on our SAG, but we do not have probation officers. And everyone's 3-year appointment is up, and probation officers came up as part of our conversation for folks to have around the table. And so we've been, when we send out the application to all kinds of listservs to get people interested, we're for sure going to make sure that we hit as many probation departments as we can. And because of funding purposes, parole has been cut so much for JRA, and so there's actually not that many youth who are on parole once getting out.
Okay, if we didn't get to your question, we are going to, they will be sent to the presenters, or you can contact the presenters directly. Their contact information is on the screen. I really want to thank everyone who was able to join today, and I want to especially thank Starsha and Deborah for being such great presenters. I will be sending out via email the recording of this webinar, some additional resources, and the PowerPoint so that you can access the links that were in the PowerPoint. They will also be posted on our website within 24 hours. And with that, thanks everyone for joining, and have a great day.